Emphasis and focal point are also principles of design that help organize the visual elements into a desired aesthetic work of art. A strong consideration for many artists is the desire to emphasize a certain area or areas within their work, drawing them immediately to the viewer's attention. This objective is particularly crucial in advertising art, for the viewer's attention must initially be seized and then guided in such a way that the product's name and image will be noticed. There are various ways in which artists create emphasis. One way is to make the object larger and place it in the foreground. Likewise, if the composition consists of irregularly shaped objects, then a geometric shape will stand out. It will be emphasized by contrast. Accentuating certain shapes, intensifying value or color, or strategically placed objects will also create emphasis. Emphasis can be used to create focal points or specific parts of the work that seize and hold the viewer's attention and interest. In Chuck Close's Lucas II, our eyes are automatically drawn to the center between Lucas II's eyes. Why is this? Close draws our attention to this single point, the focal point of his artwork, by creating concentric splotches of brightly colored circles within little squares. He has arranged them along radial diagonal lines that act as directional lines, which converge towards the center and meet at a single point right between Lucas's eyes, like a bullseye. No matter how hard we try to look at other areas of the face, we always seem to come back to the same spot, right between the eyes. Color also contributes to the focal point of Lucas II in a dramatic way. The artist used more intense and saturated colors towards the center of the face. In Lucas II, the entire face is the emphasis, as everything within the face draws our attention or emphasize the focal point, which is directly, as we've said, between the eyes. Another way to create emphasis is by isolation. Isolation is a kind of placement where something is put by itself. An item that stands apart from its surroundings will be more noticeable. But however, this is not likely to make a person or object be noticed first, but can make it stand out nevertheless. In Pablo Picasso's Family of Saltimbanques, a family of circus performers stands on a barren landscape. We first notice a group of people, but the person who repeatedly draws our attention is the isolated female on the lower right. Picasso also sets her apart by painting her in softer muted colors, which contrasts with the more saturated colors of the group. She's also the only one seated. Additionally, if we follow the gaze of the two young men and young boy, we are directed back through psychological line to the isolated woman. Remember in our last lecture, the psychological lines are similar to implied lines, but are created by gestures and glances. Rhythm is based on repetition. Music, dance, and poetry use rhythm for structure and expression. Likewise, in a composition, rhythm is the repetition of carefully placed elements, separated by intervals. These recurring visual beats move the viewer's eye through the composition in either jerky, smooth, fast, or slow ways. Rhythm is related to pattern, but it affects the entire composition. Regular rhythm is smooth and even, as you would imagine, where some visual elements is systematically repeated with a standard interval in between. Through repetition, any of the visual elements can take on a rhythm within the work of art. In Magdalena Abercanowitz's Backs, taken from a series of bodyworks called Alterations, consists of 80 fiber sculptures representing hollowed-out human backs. So what remains is the shell of a person. Her mother was mutilated by Nazis in World War II, and backs appeared to symbolize the dehumanization and horrors her mother was subjected to. Abercanowitz made each piece by pressing layers of natural organic burlap fibers into a plaster mold. Every sculpture depicts the slumping shoulders, back, and arms of a figure of undefined sex and rests legless directly on the floor. Although made from a single mold, the figures achieve a sense of individuality because each assumed a slightly different posture as the burlap fibers dried. The repeated pose, along with the repetition of the 80 backs, suggests meditation, submission, and anticipation, along with a regularity that leads the viewer's eye rhythmically over each back. With the repetitive arches and columns of the sanctuary of the mosque at Cordoba in Spain, we can see how repetition can create a rhythm in architecture. The progression of arches that span the distance between the columns lead our eye in a harmonious way from right to left all the way back to the back of the mosque. Our sixth design principle, scale, is about size, but is applied to the size relationship of objects to each other, to their surroundings, and often to human size. For example, when we photograph a famous landmark, including people in the photograph gives a more or less accurate idea of the size of the landmark. The people are the scale in this case. Simply, scale is the size of something in relation to what is standard or normal size. And normal size is the size we expect something to be. In the Count de Montezon's photograph, the hippopotamus at the Zoological Gardens, Regent's Park, we are able to realize the size of the hippopotamus by comparing it to the human figures that stand behind the animal. We see that it takes 9 people standing extremely close together to match the length of the hippo. People living in 1852, when this photograph was taken, had never seen a hippopotamus before, and seeing its size in relation to something known allowed the viewer, or the reader of the newspaper, to grasp the true size of the animal. Now, intentional distortion of scale is used to provoke viewers to look and think more carefully about what is being said by an artwork. The artist Marisol Escobar created a sculpture called Baby Girl. Marisol's Baby Girl, however, is a completely different take on childhood dolls. It is the total opposite to a soft, cuddly doll we are familiar with, as this baby doll is a giant measuring 6 feet and is made of wood. She sits stiffly in her best clothes that is trimmed with satin and an enormous bow. The body has a miniature doll positioned on her left thigh. Without knowing the size of this sculpture, we assume it to be roughly the size of a regular doll that we are accustomed to seeing. It is only when we know the true size that we get a real sense of how large this baby doll really is. The sculptor Klaus Oldenburg made a safety pin and other household objects on a giant scale. The reversal of scale makes us appreciate the shapes of these common items and add whimsy and interest to our surroundings. In the image, notice the people sitting on the park bench. We can gauge the true size of the safety pin when compared to these people. It's enormous. If scale is about the relative size of different things, proportion is about the ratio of parts to the whole. Not surprisingly, the human body is the basis for most standards of proportion. When we describe someone as having long arms, we are usually saying that they are long in proportion to the ideal norm. Many artistic cultures have developed a fixed set of proportions for depicting a correct or perfect human form. Ancient Egyptian artists, for example, relied on a squared grid to govern the proportions of their figures. Methods of the ancient Egyptians were learnt by the Greeks. Polycletus is credited with the development of the canon of proportions, which are a set of rules about body parts and their dimensions relative to one another that became the standard for creating the ideal figure. The canon of proportions is a set of standard principles. Proportioning can easily be exemplified in numbers. The geometric progression 1, 2, 4, and 8 have the obvious similarity factor that the ratio 1 to 2 is maintained throughout. A proportion that has fascinated many artists and architects since its discovery by the ancient Greeks is the ratio known as the golden mean. Look at this line that is divided into sections A, B, and C. The ratio of the shorter segment, AB, is to the larger segment, BC, as the larger segment, BC, is to the whole, AC. And the segment BC is precisely 1.618 times the length of segment AB. Segment BC is the mean in the sense that its length lies between the smaller segment AB. What? Dear. For those of you that understood that, well done. And for the rest, take comfort in knowing that the golden mean is more easily constructed than it is explained, thank goodness. Be assured that I would never ask you the intricacies of the golden mean on a test, but you are responsible for knowing that the golden mean is a proportional relationship expressed as a ratio, and that it is used as an ordering device in art, architecture, and design. And as viewers, we seem to respond to its harmonious progression in pictorial design. Because of the harmonious effect created by principles of the golden mean, the ancient Greeks used it in their architecture, as did many of the Renaissance artists, and it is still used today by many architects and artists. In the past few lectures, we examined the formal qualities of art, which are visual elements arranged into a composition using the principles of design. We have been learning to do a formal analysis of art. In order to build on this, we need also to look at style, form, and content of an artwork. Therefore, in our next lecture, we will learn how to look at an artwork's characteristics that are special to its style. We will examine form, content, and see how they differ. And in so doing, we will continue to build a pictorial language.